Hello, everyone. Welcome to the University Hall Gallery's public reception and fundraiser for Richard Yarde Portraits. It is a celebration of our first year of programming, as well as a kickoff for our fundraising campaign. I would like to thank Wylsner Bastein for performing the piano tonight. Let's give him a round of applause. And above all, too, we would really like to thank the Yarde family for supporting the exhibition and really helping put everything together to celebrate the life and work of Richard Yarde, who you can see up on the screen. Tonight we'll be hearing remarks from the Dean of the College of Liberal Arts, David Terkla, as well as a talk from the Curator, Carol G.J. Scollans. So please welcome David Terkla.
You're all in the dark. I can't. Thank you, Sam. Well, welcome, all of you, to University Hall. If you haven't been in this building before, the recital hall, this beautiful recital hall here, and of course the art gallery, which we're in the process of celebrating tonight. Since you've already thanked Wylsner, I'll just thank him again. I wanted to make a note that he is a performing arts major and also worked in the gallery last semester. Although I never had the pleasure of meeting Richard or knowing him, having seen his work in the gallery, and one of the paintings is also I've been privileged to have hanging in the entrance to the dean's office since the show came here. And reading Paul Tucker's introduction to him certainly gave me a very vivid picture of what it would have been like, and I really wish that I would have been able to know him. It's certainly a thrill for me and for all of us to be able to have his works in the gallery, in our fairly brand new gallery, both celebrating and respecting his work, and at the same time recognizing the teaching that he did for our students here. You should have, if you haven't already gone to the gallery, one of these catalogs, which I think it has the introduction from Paul Tucker. And I want to just thank a number of different people who helped make this exhibit possible, in addition to Sam and Carol. The Yarde family, especially Owen Yarde and Arden Hill, Patty Suski, Donna and Richard Golemi, and also Paul, Professor Paul Tucker Emeritus, who wrote the introductory essay for this program, and also Professor Emeritus Ruth Butler, who may still not be here. I know she's on her way, but we'll thank her later for her longtime generous support of the gallery. I should note that tonight does kick off, as we do in these kinds of cases, a fundraising event, and as part of this fundraiser, we're trying to begin a supporting fund for the gallery and its ongoing operations. A number of you have already given to the fund, and I thank you. I note that there are these handy little envelopes somewhere around here that you'll be able to find, and I encourage you to fill one out before you leave tonight. The other thing is the other thing I want to do is to mention that the gallery itself has also been partially supported by the Paul Tucker Fund, which was endowed in the past. And so that's always, I wanted to recognize that in addition to his essay. Well, with that, what I think I will do is introduce Carol Scollans. Carol has helped to curate this exhibit and largely curated, as well as two other ones, basically the major ones we've had since the gallery is open, and we are very appreciative of that, Carol. Carol is a senior lecturer, too, in our college, and I just want to turn over the mic, I think, to you and let you take it from there.
was hoping we'd get Ruth here before I start my talk because she's been a huge supporter of Richard's work, and she was a beloved member of the faculty as well before she retired recently. And I know she would be enthusiastic to see how many people here have come to attend this beautiful exhibition of Richard's work. It's a great pleasure to have you all here and to celebrate this really wonderful addition to the university, which is the first completed year of the University Hall Gallery. And as Dean said, thankfully, he acknowledged the fact that I had a great privilege of being able to execute three exhibitions, and this is the third of the three that I had planned, prior to the hiring of our fabulous new gallery director, whose name is Sam Toabe. I have to give him a big shout out because this would not have happened had he not been executing Herculean acts to bring it to fruition. So very much want to thank Sam for all of his time and attention to this. I'm also very pleased to have been a part of this wonderful exhibition, celebrating the work of Professor Richard Yarde. He was a UMB professor for many years, in the 1980s up until the early 90s. I also had the great privilege of being a student of his when I was an undergraduate here. I then had the privilege of teaching with him on the faculty when I was first hired, and I had the distinct pleasure of being a curator for 2 exhibitions of his work. So it really has been a long-term collaboration and a real labor of love because Richard's work was so extraordinary and his sensibility was so original and so brilliant. He was a beloved member of the art department faculty, and his dedication to his teaching practices was only complemented by his generosity of spirit. I can remember being in his class and he asked us, the students, to critique his works, a very rare, unusual experience to say the least, but the images that he invited us to explore of his works were significant in introducing us to people and to places that were very personal and powerful to him, but merely references to textbooks to many of us. And generally speaking, as a student of art history, it was rare, if ever, to see people of color hanging on the walls of the museums or the galleries I visited, or even outside of the construct of popular culture forums. Historically, the art historical discipline has perceived of portraits as having been considered symbols of status, of ways to define social decorum, and levels of social hierarchy, often idealized and aloof. The subjects are most often rendered in ethereal light and other worldly environments such as pastoral landscapes, and usually they're considered objects for the delectation of an elite audience. But for Richard, he saw portraiture very differently. There are those figures that are featured in this show who loom large in the lexicon of American culture, but he saw his depictions as a way to go beyond the physical representations of people or of their social status, but rather a source for intellectual and ideological statements about these individuals and to reflect upon the context of time within which they lived and worked. His choices of subject were vitally important to that definition of cultural diversity. Popular culture magazines of his youth, such as Voila and Ebony, and let me just advance the next slide, forgive me, and Jet, and even occasionally in Time magazine, reflected subjects that reflected him and his country, his community. And as a child, working at his uncle's photography studio, he learned the powers of the photograph, and he realized its resonant qualities and its ability as an image to change our perceptions of reality. It's with this in mind, Richard used the photographs as a source for inspiration, but Richard knew that color was an essential expressive tool to realize these figures, to bring these subjects to life. He would often, as you'll see in the gallery, omit the names of the subjects directly in his titles as a way to assert that they needed no introduction and should be just as ubiquitous as subjects of American culture because they were, after all, Americans. Making them the subject of high art was, in a way, following a long tradition of artists as activists, making political and humanitarian statements in their work. As was once written, we must never forget art is not a form for propaganda, it is a form for truth. In the image, the next one I'll show you, on the beautiful wall in the gallery space, this one is an extraordinary work which is called The Red Feather from 2001. And it features the subject matter of Bessie Smith, also known as the Empress of the Blues, and the most popular female singer in America during the 1920s and 30s. In the class, we perhaps knew a little bit about her career, and we know now much about her as a performer. But in this imagery, Richard introduces us not only to the beauty, but also to the woman to be admired. In the photograph, we see her somewhat vulnerable in her pose and expression, but through Richard's use of highly intensified color, she comes to life before our eyes. Color as a metaphor for who and what she was. In her personal life, she was a woman who suffered the degradations of racism in America, yet she created her own opportunities to advance the careers of herself and to self-actualize, as we refer to it now, empower herself and also her fellow musicians who traveled with her around the country. She was able to make an independent living, writing her stories, singing about her life experiences, and living her life as an emancipated woman despite the tenor of the times. The same can be said for the great Paul Robeson. In this work Richard did, which was called Paul Robeson as the Emperor Jones from 1984, it references the play by Eugene O'Neill. Robeson was a valedictorian of his graduating class in 1919 at Rutgers University. He was a highly awarded athlete in 3 sports. He would leave law school at Columbia University for a career in the arts promoting African American history and culture. He would ultimately be known as a citizen of the world. He sang opera, appeared on Broadway, and in seminal roles, but found the pervasive racism in America intolerable and departed for England. His choice to live abroad allowed him greater freedom in terms of personal freedoms and a greater acceptance and recognition of his many talents, and he traveled in the circles of the most esteemed politicians, celebrities, writers, and performers of his time. Robeson's lifelong commitment and championship of the oppressed led him to activism around the world. And unfortunately accused of being a communist in the 1940s by the House Un-American activities for his outspokenness, it would eventually derail his career, and many of his appearances would be canceled or curtailed thereafter. However, he transcended to continue to perform for human rights and justice around the world until his death in 1977. And these are just 2 examples that we see of the original image from popular culture as a source that Richard used to create their visage. The display of the photograph can appear at first a little austere, but under Richard's expert hands, he transforms these figures with the vibrant colors absent in the black and white photograph, just as the challenges these cultural figures were subject to were not just black and white. Their complexities, their creative potentials are symbolically referenced in the choice of dynamic color used to heighten the dramatic and emotional connections of his subjects. He gives them life and very intense verve in his handling of the space around them and the intensity of the colors, the directness of the person's gaze, and most importantly in the size and scale that make them provocative, but most importantly, monumental and heroic. And one of Richard's favorite subjects, one that he visited quite frequently, was the boxer Jack Johnson, the Galveston Giant, in this marvelous work which is called Victory Wreath from 1987. Richard had read Johnson's biography, Unforgivable Blackness, The Rise and Fall of Jack Johnson by Jeffrey Ward, many times, and created several images of Johnson, each in increasing size, scale, and importance. What he appreciated and understood about Johnson's life was that despite the enormous talents and impressive world successors Johnson had achieved, he was still unable to live his life without impediments of prejudice. But rather than recoil and become subservient to the larger cultural expectations in America, Johnson refused to deny the truth to himself and his identity. His approach was to resist limitations and live his life in his way, undaunted by the political and social restrictions of his own country. And in Richard's eyes, these political and social figures were truly heroic and a reason for celebration because of their abilities and willingness to rise above the fray. He would also do the same with this marvelous work called Madam Walker Rides Again from 1986. The entrepreneur Madam Walker, née Sarah Breedlove, born in the 19th century, the first self-made woman millionaire in America, Walker chose to claim her cultural heritage and forge her own paths to success. Her business acumen led her to focus on creating beauty products designed exclusively for black women, and she would go on to be one of the most important philanthropic figures in the first quarter of the 20th century. Her political activism, as well, was a source for inspiration to a next generation of black Americans confronted by Jim Crow laws, and her influence is still relevant even today, almost 100 years after her death in 1919, with the annual Spirit Awards given for entrepreneurship, philanthropy, and civic engagement in the black community. This is the way Richard saw these individuals, not merely as personalities, but as his son Owen Donovan Yarde described of his father's work, it was a way to correct history. Perhaps some of the most challenging works in this exhibition are those which are incorporating mugshots, as in this work which is called Mugshot Number 5 from 1995. And Richard had collected a number of these arrest documents from which he appropriated the subjects for his pictures. It's the directness of engagement in these people in the most vulnerable of circumstances that illuminate for us the challenges of social discord that were very much a part of Richard's world. These individuals, often anonymous in their displays, articulate the disparity and the capricious nature of the laws imposed upon black men and women during the first half of the 20th century. But Richard saw the humanities in these individuals and elevates them to a level of greatness in seeing them just as worthy subjects as those who are more well-known exhibited on the walls just next to them. He gave voice as well to people who otherwise may have gone unknown or unnoticed. And it's in a significant number of self-portraits that Richard has illustrated his most extraordinary transformation. The transformation of the self in these presentations, as my former colleague and friend Paul Tucker mentioned, Richard produced more portraits or more self-portraits than Rembrandt van Rijn and Vincent van Gogh. And the selection of these was probably the most difficult in the compilation of the show. These images show how Richard perceived himself in the most personal of manner. From the frontal and close-up vantage points of his face paired with the portrait of his beloved wife of 45 years, Susan Donovan Yarde, in Fold, Unfold from 1991, and then to the diptych also, Unfold, Unfold from 1991. We deliberately placed these images together on the wall beside each other to remind us of the 17th century Dutch middle-class practice of placing husband and wife pictures adjacent to each other. And it's here that we also begin to see Richard begin to abstract himself, eventually into more symbolic and mystical depictions, such as this imagery, which is called A New Beginning from 1999 to 2000, or the next image, the red background Blue Navel from 1999. And it will be in this arena this will be the arena that dominates his work for over a decade, continually resecting himself into disembodied and seemingly disconnected body parts, combined with dot patterns that reference DNA, genetic genome, and narrations transcribed from Braille. The latter painting, this one, he extrapolated from his experience as a patient undergoing treatment for a life-threatening illness that ultimately left him unable to paint for protracted periods of time. By this time, he abandons the use of the photograph in favor of the X-ray, which shows the intimacies and the interior parts of the human form. And these are more simplified into curvilinear shapes and forms, creating continuous webs of intersecting lines that dissolve the body into ambiguous arrangements. And here we see the artist grapple with the unknown, with the ineffable, perhaps the spiritual dimensions that allude to our collective transition from existence and remind us of our mortality. And it's in these images that they provide a link to what makes us all human without the trappings of race or culture, clearly identified and easily recognizable. And the role of the viewer is changed with these encounters from passive recipient of visual information to active intellectual engagement as we study and analyze the picture and contemplate what and how it is meant to communicate to us. In this way, Richard transforms the notion of what a portrait is and how it functions as a tool of time and space, not just a representation of perceived visual fact or perceived visual truth. And the most eloquent of works is on view, as the dean had mentioned, in his office, where it can be seen by hundreds of students, faculty, and staff every single day as they walk to and from their classes. The picture, called White Butterflies from 2006, shows Richard as his most reflective and spiritual, untethered and unfettered, fettered by the mundane and banality of everyday life. It seems in this work he depicts himself as pure spirit, as ultimately freed from earthly demands and transformed into something else equally mysterious. Historically, in Asian culture, for example, the butterfly is a symbol of personal transformation, of growth and expansion, of the self, as well as the splendor of life's endless unfolding and the ability to tackle the necessary changes of life with elegance and lightness, or an allusion to renewal and rebirth. The Japanese see the butterfly as the embodiment of the soul, sometimes the soul of the departed. And knowing how much Richard revered Japanese and Chinese philosophy, it's easy to understand his choice of self-depiction in this way. And there are other works that I want to point your attention to, which I have to make mention of. They're on view in the art department, conference room up on the 4th floor of this building. Here on the left-hand side is White Guitar from 1997, an image of Huddie William Ledbetter, probably better known as Leadbelly, an iconic figure in American music, and a wonderful portrait of Savoy couple from 1991, the Savoy Ballroom, a place that was held in high esteem by Richard as the premier venue for American jazz and blues music in New York. And as many of you know, jazz and blues were of utmost importance to him as an artist. It was a source of great inspiration and emotional connection, as we can see in the way he constructs his works as if they are melodies or improvisations. And as his pictures evolved, he would continue to add more paper to the work as the vision evolved in unpredictable ways, very much like a performance, with subtle nuances of texture and impasto continuously reworked and refined. And then finally, a short film about Richard and his city of Boston. A young man on view, his city of Boston as a young man is on view in the gallery as well, and it's a piece which is called That's Where I'm At from 1965, a really wonderful document of Boston at that era. It was a collaborative effort with filmmaker Alvin Fearing, and in this collection of images and narratives, it features Richard and the community where he grew up, in the city of Boston that existed in his youth. Sadly, would be waxing nostalgic about it later in time as his world was dismantled and destroyed during urban renewal in the 1960s. It's a document to his sense of place and to the community of time that he loved, and an environment where he became an artist in earnest. And I'm happy to say that I've just recently been informed that there are 2 more presentations of Richard's works to experience. Currently on view at the gallery at Clark University, there's an exhibition of his work from now till November 5th. And in 2018, a solo show of his work will be seen at the Westfield State University. This exhibition is going to be opening up in February. It's my hope that what we were able to accomplish in this presentation is to bring Richard's work back into focus and to acknowledge his insights and contributions to the lexicon of American art and to his time and place on this earth, and to celebrate, most importantly, his time here at the university. I hope through this experience are also able to see ourselves in the world within which we are currently existent, with the same kind of deliberateness, the same kind of causality, conviction, humanity, and beauty that Richard had seen in himself and in others. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Wylsner. I just want to add that Wylsner actually worked with us at the gallery last semester, and so it's really great to have him perform tonight and share some of his musical talents with us. I didn't introduce myself at the beginning of the program. I'm Sam Toabe. I'm the gallery curator for the University Hall Gallery. Thank you all for coming tonight and for sticking around for the program. We're going to go rejoin over in the gallery, and you can spend some more time with the works. And again, I just want to encourage everyone to hopefully support the fundraiser. We have a really great program here. I'm very, very honored to be able to work here and work with students and the professors in the university. And so we hope that you'll be able to support us in sustaining this program well into the future. And thanks again to the Yarde family for supporting the program, and all the lenders who gave works to the exhibition tonight. And especially thank you again to Carol Scollans for the talk and for David Terkla for giving the opening remarks. Thank you.